Hi. So, how the hell to explain this? ADHD happened. That's the best I got. ADHD happened. So Supervive is a game. I think I saw some trailers around for it. I don't think I ever got any marketing emails for it. But it's basically, what if Fortnite and League of Legends? What if those two things at the same time? So it's basically a MOBA battle royale, right? Which sort of mixes and matches like the top-down perspective of a League of Legends style game with, you know, MOBA mechanics like running around on a map. There's a storm closing in. You have to find resources, all that nonsense. I'm not really interested in the gameplay, though. It looks fun. Like, it's... Well, I lie. I'm maybe a little bit interested in the gameplay, because from what I've seen of the trailers, basically what they're trying to target is League of Legends players who are sad that League of Legends isn't really fun for casuals anymore. Right, and that I'm one of them. So it does sort of poke at my brain a little bit, like maybe that if this thing actually works and becomes a thing, maybe that would be. And the game itself also seems pretty specifically tailor-made to appeal to, first of all, League of Legends players, and second of all, Overwatch players and people who are sort of in that hero shooter MOBA battle genre who are quite annoyed that esports has taken over everything in the space. That seems to be the pitch that the game is making. And then I started sort of digging into, okay, what is this game? Where's it from? Why does all of the artwork in this freaking game look like it comes straight out of, you know, a League of Legends mobile game clone? On the Chinese App Store somewhere. And the reason for that, it turns out, is because a whole bunch of League of Legends people worked on it, including on the artwork and design. There's actually one of the concept artists who works on like the sort of deep background concepts for this game is a former Fortiche animator who, among other things, seems to have worked on Arcane. But there's a whole bunch of League of Legends people, a whole bunch of ex-Riot, a whole bunch of ex-Blizzard as well, a bunch of Overwatch folks. I think one of the lead artists actually was a lead artist on Overwatch 2. So the fact that the game has this specific aesthetic appeal, it's not just a marketing decision. It also seems to be like a genuine result of the people who are working on it. But the game aesthetically, and that's the thing that kind of caught me, aesthetically it is pitching itself very specifically to League of Legends and Overwatch fans, right? By basically having a visual style that, first of all, sort of, I think it's reminiscent of some of the visual style that Overwatch had in Season 1. Not necessarily as good in the character designs. We'll get into that. That's what this video is about. But certainly playing within that same stylistic wheelhouse with a healthy dose of sort of League of Legends style, anime-inspired fantasy layered over the top of that, as you can probably tell from this like key art that we've been lingering on. But the thing that really got me interested is because I was poking around to the game and I was looking at the website and I was like, okay, so what's the lore here? Right? Like, what? Like, you have these characters, like bright, colorful character designs and all that. What's the background story? Like, why are any of these characters doing this? What's their motivation? And as far as I can tell, Theorycraft Games have not put any of that information online whatsoever. Like, there's like, in the press stuff, I'm looking at their publicly available press kit right now. In the press stuff, there is the implication that, like, okay, you play as these heroes and they are storm chasers who are looking for glory, right? So that whatever is happening in the center of this, like, Fortnite closing circle storm thing is, oh, it's treasure hunting, or there's glory in there, like, they're there for money or fame or whatever. Hence why they all look like completely different freaks, right? Like, from one another, that there isn't really a sort of cohesive central visual aesthetic that unites them with one. Well, there is a central style in the game, but in the sense, like, there's not a faction like there's Noxus, right, in League of Legends. It's all a bunch of characters who are designed to look as different from each other as possible to be recognizable on the playfield. But it's because there was no lore. I got it in my head like, okay, well, what if I were to take a look at the characters and I just try and see if I can read the character design to figure out what their deal is, like do some speculation. This is the kind of shit that I do for fun. But I was supposed to be doing work today, so in an effort to sort of recoup some of my losses and make a little bit of money doing this, I'll turn it into a video and I'll monetize it and I'll put it on YouTube, and hopefully some other people will find it interesting as well. Basically, concept art for a video game, not a lot of detail available, lots of freedom for me to just speculate out loud as much as I want. Catnip to my eyes. Do you see? One thing about Theorycraft Games that should be noted, by the way, they are an indie startup with $50 million in investment money, and a pretty big team of, like, very accomplished industry veterans behind them, like people with a lot of industry connections. So this is not like an actual indie game in the way that we think of it, like 5 people in their basements and like bedrooms, like bedroom programming their way through. This is a bunch of industry professionals who don't want to work at Riot and Blizzard anymore, who were able to find $50 million in seed investment to try and develop specifically this game, presumably, again, this is me sort of reading the tea leaves, presumably as a play for the disaffected League of Legends players, the disaffected Overwatch players, trying to grab onto like Fortnite players that are ready to move on to something a little bit more mechanically intense, that kind of thing, capture the party vibes that a game like League of Legends, a game like Overwatch used to have for casuals. That seems to be the pitch that they're sort of trying to go for here, which explains some of the content creators that they've had playing this game. Like I saw Spazzy, I saw Tyler One, I saw Doublelift even, like all the sort of like a bunch of League of Legends associated, like the former pro players, former like major content creators, comedy content creators, entertainment variety content creators who've turned streamer, right? That seemed to be who they were targeting for their marketing when it came to that stuff, which again sort of makes me think, okay, this is kind of a game that's designed to appeal to me a lot, because I do miss olden times League of Legends, back when you could just kind of roll up something stupid and lame, and it wasn't considered like unsportsmanlike behavior. It was just, you were just kind of annoying for a game. You memed a little and then you locked out, right? But anyway, bunch of characters. Let's take a look at them and let's see if I can try and suss out what their deal is just by looking at it. But first, I want to look at some of that background art, some of that concept art. Because as they describe the game, it is a neon apocalypse game. And there's a bunch of like glowing neon sort of vaporwave-esque like adjacent aesthetics here and there in a bunch of the marketing and a bunch of like the artwork that's used for promoting the game. But looking at this background design and this like world design that we have in this concept art, this feels much more specifically fantasy inspired to me, quite frankly. Like the idea is that seems to be like we have this mixture of fantasy aesthetics and sort of modern, like cyberpunk futuristic-esque, like neon lights and glow stick nonsense going on. And I'm kind of curious about it, because this fully looks like, well, the architecture is actually a little bit more modern than League of Legends. Like if you were designing an area of Summoner's Rift for this is too modern. There's a lot of this layout that feels too modern for the sort of ancient fantasy fortress in the forest vibe that League of Legends uses on Summoner's Rift, which again, interesting. Like I like these little differentiations that exist here. There's implications to this, obviously, that there's some kind of ancient mythology, some kind of temple with some kind of worship of a goddess kind of thing, broken temples, blah blah, world falling apart, and whatever the hell the storm turns out to be. So that's vaguely interesting to me. Not anything I can actually sort of build a theory out of, but looking at the characters, that's the other thing that kind of hooked me in, is that I looked at this character spread and I was like, oh, there's like a fairly half-decent variety here. I'm like, yeah, and then I scrolled over to the right here and I saw these three and I was like, oh, hello, I recognize all of you. Hello, that's Senna in an Ashe cosplay. Hello, that's I think Jet from Valorant, but with Widowmaker's sniper rifle, and like we have like Akali with Vi's gauntlets, Lucian with Aatrox's sword. Hey Zeri, how you doing? I'm being reductive, right? I'm being reductive. It's not just like that they're straight up copying League of Legends. It's like similar archetypes, clearly, and clearly a lot of the same people worked on it and had a lot of the same sort of aesthetic impulses, but it just amused me a lot that this looked so much like Senna in Ashe cosplay. But let's sort of set that aside for a moment and let's try and read what we've got going on here, because like I said, like the game seems to traffic in a very interesting mixture of high fantasy and like sort of Valorant style neon glow future tech. I guess we'll start from the left here with you there, ma'am. Or, well, I don't know what the pronouns are, because there's no lore information about any of them. So, dancer, right? Like, that's the immediate thing. We have the ballet shoes, we have the tutu, basically made out of what looks like ice crystals, could be diamonds, like it could be either or. I'm leaning towards ice, given that we have all of this blue, and like these very cool colors in her color scheme. And like, that would be the classic thing, right? Like with a woman who has like a sort of haughty attitude and like sort of like, I'm disaffected and I don't care about you. Vibe is like, oh, Ice Queen, right? Like that's the immediate place I'd go. What pushes me away from the idea of this character being specifically ice elemental is, well, she ain't exactly wearing a lot of winter protective clothes of any kind, right? Like that would be the other component of a character that uses ice powers, is that some aspect of their fashion will usually be winter themed, right? It'll usually be a parka or like something with fur lining, or at least something that covers the, well, I mean, fucking Ashe in League of Legends again, but she doesn't really follow that role. Neither do most of the Freljord champions, but the usual way to communicate this character deals with cold, think of Mei in Overwatch, is to give them clothes that would allow them to resist the cold and thrive in a cold environment specifically. So there is something interesting to this character's really not having any kind of cold weather gear on her. Now, I'm not sure whether that's because, like, that's as a means to signify that she is, like, untouchable, that she's untouched by the cold, she's unbothered by it, or as a thing of, like, she projects the cold outwards from herself but doesn't feel it because she's emotionless, which is, like, another classic sort of ice trope that's sort of a... Hello, Twitch. That's associated with that. I don't know 100%. There's something about, like, the jewelry that gives me a vibe of self-expression. That, like, if you're thinking of a character who's, like, 100% cold, 100% disaffected, 100% no emotions, you wouldn't necessarily expect to find them doing stuff like wearing jewelry or, like, adorning themselves in a way that, like, so as to invite aesthetic interest from other people, right? That's one of my problems with Widowmaker in Overwatch, is that, like, on the one hand, they do the whole thing where her entire thing is that she has no emotions, no feelings, and doesn't care about anything except the next kill. But then on the other hand, she also clearly, like, cares a lot about her appearance and, like, cares very deeply aesthetically about, like, how she pulls off her job. And it's something I felt like they never really resolved either within her character design, but maybe within her lore a little bit. I think Overwatch in later stages tried what little the writers were allowed to do to imply that Widowmaker was recovering some parts of Emily, right? Like, was recovering some parts of herself, and that those had been the parts that had sort of been pushing her towards expressing the way that she does. Which was interesting, not that the Overwatch writers ever really got to do anything with it, to the best of my knowledge, but that was one of the things I disliked about her character design, is that the sexualization and the sort of femme fatale thing, along with, like, the description of, like, they do this quasi-erotic thrill thing with her feelings about, like, oh, I only feel alive when I kill, right? That's sort of, okay, so that implies that she's a pleasure seeker who actually kind of lives for the passion, and the character design sort of says that as well. But then you have all these blue tones with, like, the cold skin, and the lore says that she's completely emotionless and has, like, I thought it was an ill-judged deployment of the sort of sexy femme fatale trope, specifically for Widowmaker, because she's a sniper, right? How do we get here? Right, because when you have a femme fatale, like an icy character who's, like, emotionless, doesn't care about what anyone else thinks about them, the adornments that you might choose for them is either nothing, to sort of signify that, like, they are completely divorced from caring about anyone else's opinion, like, that they have no particular strong fashion, they just sort of wear usually uniform. Or you might choose some jewelry that enhances that spiky, hostile nature, right? Like, you might choose, like a jewelry that has ice crystals on it, or which is, like, spiky and pokey, sort of as though to say, get the hell away from me, or I am a sharp personality, or, right, like, I'm dangerous. That's what's happening with the crystals around her waist, right? Like, they are affecting a tutu, but they're also very clearly, like, that's very much a give me personal space signal if I ever saw one, right? Like, that's a don't get close to me signal if I ever saw one, right? That's a warning signal to stay the hell away from me. So the rounded parts of, like, the jewelry that she's wearing, that this is, like, very thick, round, heavy rings, aesthetically interesting. Like, I don't know what, if anything, that signals about her character, but aesthetically that kind of pokes at me and kind of goes, okay, so is that because there's supposed to be something else? That's the other thing also with the hair that's done up, like very strongly sort of done up in a bun and like very controlled hairstyle. There's always the implication of like what happens when this character lets their hair down, right? Like hair bound up in a tight bun on a character's head, regardless of their gender, frankly, is often a visual shorthand for this character keeps a lot of stuff bottled up, right? This character keeps a lot of stuff tightly under control, and that there's like a greater expressiveness, something like, because hair is big and it's flowy and it gets messy and tangled and curled and wild, that there is a greater expressiveness, a greater passion underneath that's being like held back and which can be unleashed, right? Where these hair accessories would act as kind of a seal on that, right? Like where you can kind of see that this ribbon essentially replaces a long flowing ponytail for her, right? So that there's this, like, she herself is bound up, but there's this other thing that sort of like stands in for it and adds to that sense of elegance and grace that she probably, like, given that she's a ballet dancer sort of type character, probably has a bunch of like spinning, twirling, acrobatic moves where having something trailing behind her will really like sort of sell that animation. So I'm curious about that. There's also the asymmetry of her top here, that we have the sleeve on one arm and no sleeve on the other arm. Asymmetry, depending on how it's deployed, can be a signifier of instability, right? Like that the character is not perfectly balanced, quite literally. So this again might be a thing that signifies, okay, this is someone who has an outward appearance of being a total ice queen, hiding herself away, but it's not a stable facade, right? It's a facade that, depending on how we read that sleeve, might even have taken some damage, right? Like this kind of looks like the sleeve has almost been ripped off. So maybe this is a character who's taken some kind of damage that has destabilized their control. Or maybe it's a character who's not nearly as controlled as she likes to pretend to seem. Something like that. That would be my, having no other context whatsoever for like the lore of this game, that would be my read on you. And actually, I think there were larger versions of the concept arts here. Yeah, Celeste she's called, even. How big is this? Oh, pretty large. Oh, I like that. She was apparently mirrored in the other one there. Yeah. But yeah, there's some Oriana coding here, right, for the League of Legends fans. Let's take a look at Void here next, because he interested me quite a lot, I gotta be honest. Because that's the thing, right? We have this ballerina in, like, very modern fashion. And then we have this guy who's, like, straight up a World of Warcraft character, right? Like, well, except for the fucking magic glow arms, I feel like that's not really very World of Warcrafty. But this guy looks like straight out of like a high fantasy video game of some sort, right? Like this guy is a mage, he's a sorcerer, he's got like the big bushy sort of what are they called, sideburn beard thing going on. He's got decorations, he's got eyes on his cloaks which sort of signify vision, and like the third eye idea of like being able to peer beyond that which is normal. And he has the big giant glowing purple JoJo arms sort of floating behind him, which are clearly the things that do his damage for him, whereas his own hands are sort of held in this careful... Okay, well, the camera absolutely cannot track that hand posture, jeez. Which is held in front of him in this, like, very dignified, careful, like, poised manner in front of him, like, posed up against each other. He's got painted nails, I think, or maybe this is just his natural nail color, but certainly coated after painted nails. Rings, like, accessories around his arms that sort of indicate, I am not someone who works with my hands. I have magic hands to do the handwork for me, hands, kind of thing. But then there's the modern aspect again, and I really like the way that it's mixed on this guy, because we have, like, these pants, which, like, look like a substantially more modern sort of trouser than you would expect from like a wizard with a robe. And also that this wizard robe thing he's wearing, well, it's actually a giant overcoat, right? That's hanging down in a sort of very haute couture fashion with this big scarf hanging over the top of it, like, which smooths out like the hard edges that would otherwise be in like a suit jacket like that or a jacket like that, to give that sort of wizardly stately robe like thing going on. But then we immediately transition into like these much sharper shapes of like a modern fashion aesthetic. And I really like the gold chain around his neck for some reason. The gold chain around the neck is such a thing that, like, at least to me, that feels like such a thing of a specific archetype of an older man who wants to show off wealth, right? Like, who wants to indicate, like, wealth, power, status in a very, very modern context, which is such a beautiful, like, contrast with all the fucking fantasy nonsense that's going on from up here when he's like a Draenei, almost, in some aspects, like with this sort of goat-like, animalistic face anatomy, the long ears and the horns on his head. So if I had to take a guess about who this guy is, he would be like the scion of some ancient school of magic or bloodline of magic or whatever. Someone who's perhaps more deeply connected to the mystical underpinnings of whatever's going on in the story than the other characters are. Someone who, like, is on a quest for some kind of magical knowledge or to protect some kind of magical secret, and who has some kind of deeper insight into the storm and what it is and why it's happening or why the world is shattered and all of that. Like, who might know some of the history and the backstory. And the way that he's sort of poised, the way that his fashion is put together, like the fucking steepled hand makes him feel a little bit like a mastermind type of character, right? Like maybe someone who considers himself a little bit above the people that he's interacting with, right? Like who has a little bit of a standoffish attitude. Like there's a closed offness to the big scarf and like the coat covering his body and like his main body sort of being covered in shadow. There's a standoffishness, there's a secretiveness to that, also with like the black eyes with like the white pinpricks inside, very mystical, but also very sort of like we don't really have access to a human expression from this guy, right? He expresses himself in a way that is inhuman, that is like mystical and strange and unfathomable in many ways. That also sort of comes back again with these rings here. I should look for those. Like, are they a motif across these characters? Like the rings specifically, because they've been here on him. And so hang on. Let me just go and have a quick look around. No, I don't think they really show up. These thick, heavy rings. Except, maybe? No, not there either. No, okay, they're not a consistent motif. They're just a thing that they seem to share. Might just be by accident. It's entirely possible that that's not intentional, but that would be the sort of thing where I'd be curious. Does that indicate some kind of relationship between them? That they both have this similar style of heavy ring incorporated as part of their character design? I wonder about that. Plausible, not impossible. Which, like, maybe sets up for a thing of, like, sagely older adopted wizard grandpa and his, like, traumatized ice queen, I need to be perfect and control the world around me, adoptive granddaughter kind of dynamic. That might be something. No idea if that, like, that's just a trope potential that sort of comes up with that little visual connection between the two of them. I really like this guy, though. Like, I really like this character design. This character design, feel like it... Yes, it has that old, ancient, like, magic wizard thing going on, but there's also a sense of a personality beyond that. Like, a slightly more modern personality than just, I am old, and I am wise, and I am a riff on Gandalf, right? There's a modernity to him. That also makes him, like, with the purple and the black and, like, the sort of gray and, like, the staring eye thing he's got going on, a little bit sinister, right? He could be evil, for all we know. Also not helped in the case, like, with the infinity motif on the rings. He's got on his... Is that an infinity motif? It kind of looks like it, or maybe it's two circles joined together. I don't know. Either way, it's a motif that implies, like, okay, there's some kind of cultural thing that he's referencing here that means something related to his power. Then we have the moon rabbit. That seems to be basically what this is. This is the moon rabbit, the rabbit in the moon, like very riffing on that particular bit of mythology and folklore, because it's a rabbit and it's just moon crescents from head to toe. Crescent moons, moon crescents, crescent moons, and moon crescents, and whoever designed this character design knows how to do furry art, because them some meaty frickin' paws right there. That's not like cutesy cat girl human hands with like maybe slightly long nails. That's someone who knows like how to do a paw pad. Which I appreciate, by the way. That's a nice thing, and I like that animalism to the character, that it's not just a cute girl with bunny ears, but that there is an animalism to her anatomy and the way that she's put together. It's quite nice. So there's a closed offness to her design, right? Like with the big collar that hides her mouth. with like the full covering of these like huge robes that she's wearing, that like they are wearing, I don't know their gender, that cover up so much about them, and sort of their expression is left fairly ambiguous, especially without the guidance of the mouth to sort of shape what the expression is. You get a sense of a character who's holding back some kind of secret, who is not saying everything that they know, and who is mystically connected, right? Like, that's the thing, that this looks like priests' robes, right? This looks like something like either someone who's from the nobility, sort of feudal Japan, East Asia, Korea, maybe, kinds of aesthetics. Looks like someone who's like of a priestly or a noble class of some kind, and everything that has to do with the stars, the moons, the all of that is obviously inherently mystical, right? Like, that has a instant and undeniable connection with magic, with the supernatural, with that which is in the sky, right? So my read on this character would be, especially like, and the little jar around their neck is also clearly fucking important to this character, right? Because it's not just a little pendant. It's like, this is a jar, it has a stopper, and there's a white liquid inside of it which glows. So that seems like, I'm thinking like Frodo in Shelob's lair with like the little vial of starlight from Galadriel sort of thing, like that this might be the bottled moonlight of their moon home in the stars, whatever, and then that's what they're holding on to as like a power source as they cling to life in the mortal realm, something like that. Yorick style, going back to League of Legends as a point of reference again. I quite like the red as a component of this character design as well, because like, we have this sort of bluish white, very sort of moon glow, silvery, like lunar, like full moon light thing. We have I like it that it's not gold all the time, but we have like the gold of like the crescent moon, which again, the moon in the sky gets kind of yellowy and golden when the sun is really hitting it, right? So like, these are all moon colors. Then we have like this dark blue, which is like the black of the night sky. And then we have the red, right? Which is a lovely contrasting thing that like really gives some pop and a sense of life. Without that red, like this character would look even more like a ghost, I think, even more like someone who's not alive, in fact, a spirit of some kind. But the red really gives a little bit of that hot blood of life, right? A little bit of that sense of having something else going on rather than just all moon mysticism all the time, that there is some kind of something else happening with this character, right? Like, the decision to make these ropes red feel like, from a fashion perspective, right? Like, why would this character whose entire color scheme is so moon-coded, why would they have this one thing that contrasts so strongly with the rest of their color scheme, right? Like, that stands out in that way. It's like, oh, that indicates maybe like a love for something that's a little bit more passionate, that's a little bit brighter, that's a little bit more saturated, a little bit louder, right? Again, don't know exactly how all of that shakes out. It could be a seal on their power as well, right? Like with these sort of bonds holding the sleeves together. Maybe it's a thing that sort of indicates that they are restrained in some way, or that their power is contained. Maybe that's why the red things are on the rope around the little jar around their neck. Who knows? But it's nice, and I like the asymmetry of having the sort of earrings decorations only on one ear over there. That adds, again, a little bit. If the character had been perfectly symmetrical left to right, you'd get more of a sense of someone who is stolid and like set in their ways and stable and perhaps incurious, right? Like someone who's like ritualistic or very specific and unchanging. But because there's that little asymmetry where one ear gets the little decorations that sort of break up the beautiful shape of the ears, like you kind of go, oh, okay, maybe there's a little personality there, maybe there's a little something hiding in there. Asymmetry is like a good choice to make that happen, I think. Then we have Felix here. What was the moon called? Luna, of course. Then we have definitely not Twitch. We have Felix, who seems to be a firefox. That sort of seems to be the vibe that they're going for here. Is we have like flamethrower liquid with the flame symbol on the back, and then we have a fucking flamethrower with a burner and like this little Final Fantasy bomb as looking little critter in the flask in there. And then, of course, like, the tail has it's got flames. It's a Firefox. It's Firefox. You can play as Firefox, the character in this game, apparently. Which is cute. It's kind of adorable. There's also some Ziggs vibes here. Again, going back to the League of Legends reference with, like, the helmet over just at the top of the head, and then like the goggles over the eyes. That's a very sort of Ziggs vibe, which adds to that sense of like, this is clearly the sort of mad bomber character, right? Like, this is like the fire, hey! Like jumping into battle, throwing fire all around, being a little chaos gremlin sort of thing. The big grin helps with that. Like the sprightly sort of small gremlin-like stature helps with that. Like the spiky tail helps with that. And I'm curious about like the bomb in the jar in here. Does that indicate that what he's got there, or what they've got there in their backpack here, is not like fuel in the sense of being some kind of fuel liquid? It's not kerosene, it's not gasoline or something, but that this might in fact be some kind of magical creature, some kind of magical spirit that is lending Felix its power. Another interesting thing is the little tag on Felix's ear, which to me, either it's a price tag, which indicates that maybe Felix is something you can buy at a store, which, okay, which would be like sort of escaped high-end pet with too much intelligence finds a way to fight back kind of vibe, or lab experiment, right? Like this is an animal that has been tagged in order to be identified in a sort of laboratory setting, that this is maybe some kind of escaped experimental animal, some kind of escaped experimental creature that stole a highly experimental flamethrower thing and now is out causing a rampage of the whatever for whatever reason. That little tag is a really nice detail there, because like without the tag, I don't have any sense of what this thing's deal is beyond just I make fire and I cackle gleefully when I make fire because I am the gremlin one. The tag on the ear, that implies something, right? Like that implies something else happens to this, that there's something else going on in this character's backstory or in their nature where someone somewhere decided to put a tag on their ear that sits there to this day. And it also tells us something about how this character relates to that thing, is like, clearly he has not tried to remove it, right? Like, this is not something that they are desperate to purge from themselves or get rid of, so maybe it's not an indication of a tragic, traumatic past, or maybe it's an indication that this character is, like, so fucking over it that they don't even give a shit anymore, or maybe that they're keeping it around as a reminder. Like, who knows? There could be a million reasons, especially with a character who's clearly visually designed to be a little bit of the lol so random character, the Junkrat character, as it were. But the tag I find fascinating. I quite like the tag as a thing. That implies stuff in a way that I find compelling. Then we have one of my favorite character archetypes, which is tiny, adorable little thing in giant, big robot armor. That's good. That's just a good archetype. I just quite like that. There's a sort of lion aspect, leonine aspect, or maybe like a bit of a bear aspect to the face here on the chest, right? That we have, or maybe like a little bit Gundam, actually, a little bit Megazord, where you have like these pistons standing in for teeth. You have this leonine nose. You have the two eyes, like the muzzle snout embedded into the armor. That's sort of like, oh, okay, that dares to ask the question of like, is this the entity that's fully in control, or is this like a collaboration where the robot suit and the little sprite creature, whatever the hell it is that sits on, what's its name, by the way? I keep forgetting. Oath. That sits on top collaborate in order to pilot this body around? That would be interesting. Or rather that this little thing is the power source for the thing, right? Like, for the body. So there's two things. It's called Oath, and it has like this like Purity Seal Warhammer 40k ass thing, like with these like, what I'm looking for, banners, streamers hanging out from the armor. There's a little bit of like with this spiky design over the top of it, something like, again, like thinking Reinhardt a little bit, Crusader like, a little bit sort of like an armored knight sort of situation going on here, which, again, if the character is called Oath, that might indicate that this is someone who's taken a solemn vow to do right by the world and fight for justice, or like whatsoever the case may be. But then also the graffiti, right? On top of that, the graffiti, which complicates the idea. Along with, we'll talk about the face later. The graffiti then complicates that idea. Like, we don't have like an austere, shining knight in white armor and gold who's like rides out to do justice to the world. We have a character who's been tagged, right? Quite literally been tagged with graffiti by someone, which adds a little bit of that again, it's that detail that creates the interest, right? Like, it's, oh, hang on, what's up with that? Like, why is that there? That's a detail that seems dissonant with the rest of the archetype that creates interest. Like, clearly there's a story there. Is this a tag that was placed on Oath here because people out in the real world just don't give a shit about oaths anymore, and they just used him as a graffiti wall because they don't respect him, and it's like a mark of disrespect that he, she, it, they is just kind of taking without thinking about it, without complaining, without trying to wash it off because, like, oh, it's like, that's not connected to my duty, I don't care? Or is it tagging of affection, right? That's certainly what it kind of seems to be like down here on the arm to me. Like, that could be either a paint smear from where Oath punched someone so hard that it splattered all over the arm. Something about this also feels affectionate. Like, or rather, like, it could be affectionate. Like, this could be Oath has a community somewhere of plucky street kids that they protect, that like to put their tags on Oath's body as memories to keep Oath by, right? Specifically in the way that graffiti tags are often associated with identity, right? Like, this is my graffiti tag. This graffiti tag means I was here, I am here, I claim this, I am part of, like, this neighborhood, this community. This is mine in some way, right? Like, so that whoever Oath's community is would tag them as a means to sort of show support and leave a mark of themselves on it as a way to signify a connection between them. Could go either way there. I lean more towards this being benevolent than destructive, frankly, because of the way it's positioned. Like, this doesn't really seem like vandalism so much as it's like that sort of friendly scribbling, right? We've got one here on the left side over where the heart would be, right? That to me, like, if it was vandalism, I would expect it to be much more jagged and dissonant and sort of spread all over the character's body and not just focused only on the white parts, but maybe on, like, the gold parts as well. I don't have a turnaround. Maybe if we turn the character around, there's a bunch of spray paint on the gold parts as well. Who knows? Very Solari, like with the circle and, like, the spikes on it. Also something that's very connected to the sun, and the character design of this little floating will-o-wisp motherfricker here, also very sun-like, right? Like, that, there's definitely something of, like, that looks a little bit like a sun in the center of a solar system with a cute little face on it that just kind of goes, hi, I'm Oath. I am tiny, but I have a big sword, right? That's sort of the vibe I'm getting here. Which makes me wonder if there's some element of sun worship here. That would certainly tie in with the gold color theme, like the white and gold, like that. Yo, no, that's classic for, like, if you want to do someone like who's associated with light, with gold, with whiteness, with not whiteness in a racial sense, but in the color sense, and the sun. Absolutely, white and gold would be the thing you did for something like that. Where I'm wondering if, like, it's a thing of solar power being solar powered, like this is a futuristic thing. That this was maybe an attempt to create fusion energy, like an infinite fusion generation power source, and then they installed it into a generator, and then bad stuff happened, and the consciousness inside the thing decided to build its generator into a battle tank armor that it could use to protect the people it cares about. Who knows? Million possibilities, given that there's no context. I quite like the teal-green thing in the banners here. That's a good color contrast that sort of accents and plays well with, like, the graffiti tags, and sort of, like, gives a little bit of variety to the thing without ever overwhelming the character design. That's quite a nice little one. Like, I still prefer the dome-headed robot character from Deadlock, but this hits some of the same beats. Like, it has some of that same appeal to me. Let's see, Shiv. Gee, I wonder if this is an assassin of some kind. Like, I don't know, I can't tell. Who knows? They could be, maybe they work in a soup kitchen. Maybe they run a sewing shop for plushies. Maybe that's what they do with their time. Maybe they don't kill people at all. Who knows? But no, yeah. Say hello to the dark, edgy assassin character. This is the dark, edgy assassin character who's dark and edgy and who assassinates people. That's that's really the whole entire visual storytelling that I'm getting here is, yeah, no, this is assassin character who kills people, and sort of the twist is magic, right? That we have these gun-like things, but which also have sort of a fantasy aspect to them, and which are clearly connected with, like, the rune tattoos that are running up and down this character's body, and extend into, and this is, like, I will say, that's a very fucking cool visual, that you have, like, a handgun that extends into a sniper rifle by virtue of, like, these magical runes that just kind of extend into a barrel shape hanging off of the thing. Like, that is visually, like, a very fucking cool thing, a very cool idea. It's like makes a assassin gadget, but like with magic. I like that. That's quite cool. Again, we have like the tall collar, we have the face mask, like all of that sort of saying we're concealing the face, we're concealing the character, like this character has secrets that they will not tell, and like they're keeping to themselves and they're not opening up kind of thing. That's all from like that collar, from the mask. Even the hairstyle kind of helps with that, like sort of being this almost disguising the left half of the face, right? Like with like this shadow flopping down over it. Then there's all the sharp shape language, right? Like the hair, the ears, the shape language on the guns themselves, on the tattoos. You have all these spikes on the sort of star symbols that are hanging around the character, like that. That's all. And then of course the fucking heel blades, which like careful when you're crossing your legs, I guess. That all seems like classic visual shape language to indicate this character is deadly and lethal, and kills people and stabs people and harms people and does hurt to people because they're dark, and they're like it's very that it's Shadow the Hedgehog ass character design, right? Like that's not necessarily a detriment. I'm curious about this ring on the back though, because that kind of seems like a thing of you attach a chain to that to keep them on a leash. Would be my reading of that. Like this is like the leash on a dog collar, kind of like the attachment point for a dog collar, or some kind of restraining thing would be my reading on that little ring sort of hanging down the back from them. Because if it was on the front, you'd be like, oh, it sort of stands in for like a hyper-stylized zipper or whatever. But this feels more like that's a restraining thing. Which begs the question about like these bands around the arm that are there, whether these are meant to accentuate the character's power or be an indication that they are shackled in some way, that something has a hold, a grasp on them, on like their sources of power, which is their arms, right? Like you have these glowing tattoos, you have the guns. The arms are clearly this character's visual source of power, but then there's these bands around it. Does that indicate that someone else has a hold over them? Or that something or someone is limiting them or has a grasp on them? Or is it just a personal thing of like this breaks up a big, bright, glowing shape on the character? Could go either way. I can't really say that without further context, I don't think. Cool character design. Like, this is a cool, appealing... I think maybe a little bit over-designed. I think maybe there's a little bit too much going on here visually, which is a thing that's, like, reasonable to say about Void here, for example, as well. They're, like, between all this texture and all this stuff that's going on, it could probably be simplified a little bit to be a little bit cleaner in that way. This one is the first one where I feel like there's a bit of a problem with too much detail overload. Like, too many things competing for space and attention. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can go for that vibe. You can go for that over-designed vibe with way too much shit going on, especially if what you're going for is a character who's, like, stereotypically anime badass and cool and evil and dangerous and, like, I have all of the power, anti-hero, like, whatever it is. Adding a ton of complexity on top of a character is a good way to create that sense of, like, this is a complicated, dark, brooding, edgy character. In contrast to when you make a cheery shonen protagonist, you want to keep them very simple, right? So it's not necessarily a criticism. I do feel it muddies up the design a little bit here, but, you know, whatever. Speaking of shonen protagonists, you are an interesting one. Zephyr. He has the moon on his back, or they have the moon on their back. Which, you know, that's interesting. We have this back thing, this little simple sigil thing, which to me evokes the visual language of Shintoism, Buddhism, like various forms of East Asian religiosity. I feel like I see these concentric circles and rings and like circular shapes that span around the character's back that are specific to that specific kind of aesthetic of divinity. And the fact that they also have the moon on their back, to me, says, okay, like, is this a character who has some kind of semi-divine heritage? Some kind of control or power over the moon? And if so, what's their relationship to the moon rabbit, who's also very moon-themed with moon stuff going on? Don't know, but I'd be curious to find out. Then we have this wind chime with, like, the ghostly magical tag hanging out of it. Which, like, along with the staff, which has a flower motif, interesting. Like, there's a bunch of different stuff going on here that I'm not 100% sure how to reconcile. Because we have the moon, we have the sort of streetwear Tetsuya Nomura ass with, like, the shorts and, like, the big shoes, very Kingdom Heartsy thing going on with the spiky hair and the elf ears And then on top of that, we also have this flower petal thematic that's happening on the staff, with like this sort of vine thing creeping down and curling around the staff down to the end, which is like very nature themed. And nature theming would go well with like the green color scheme and like the elaborate sort of Art Nouveau style decorativism, like the leaf motif on the character's arms. Where the moon comes into that, though, I'm not really sure. Like, when you're doing plants, usually you'd go for the sun, right? Like, when you're doing plants, I don't feel like the moon is often invoked in that context, so I'd be curious what the connection between those two thematic elements are. Because most of this character's design certainly seems like, oh, this is like a modernized version of an elven plant mage, right? Like, that sort of seems to be the place that this is coming from. But then the moon. Then my old enemy from Bloodborne decides to show up and hang up out on their back. And I don't know what to make of that, quite frankly. Like, what's the moon got to do with the plant and sort of... I think this almost looks like a sort of insect leg kind of thing. What's the moon got to do with that, specifically? We've got the Band-Aid on the cheek, which is sort of the usual thing that indicates, oh, this is a rambunctious youth whomst be getting into the troubles and acquiring scrapes in misadventures and such. Same thing we kind of get from, like, the short pants with the pant legs rolled up. The sort of sporty shoes, sneaker shoes, and the t-shirt, like the naked arms and the gloves. That all sort of says to me this is someone who like runs around, does parkour, maybe if they're an urban character, or explores the forest and climbs trees if they are like a countryside character. Those are also the indications that I would take to mean that's a character who leads that kind of a lifestyle, which again, that kind of active wear, very modern, sort of mischievous kid kind of thing, sits in a certain contrast with, like, the moon, which is, like, this divine, stately object that hovers, like, in stability in the sky and, like has a predictable cycle that it goes through every single month. This feels more chaotic than that, and then the same thing with the plant thing, like, with the flower thing in the thing. The flowers tend to be placid, quiet, reliable, decorative, not really active or, like, wild or anything that seeks out action or interest, but the character does. So, what's the point of having the contrast between those elements of the character? I don't think I can say necessarily. Like, my best guess would be that this is someone who carries a great legacy on their back, right? Like this, they have some kind of divine heritage, some kind of moon heritage, some kind of something that connects them with the heavy duty of some kind of being a priest of the moon, something along those lines, right? But then that their actual interest, the thing that they actually want to do is run around, explore nature, plant plants, make flowers, some part of their self-expression, which is in conflict with their duties to the cult of the moon or whatever. Like, that would be my best guess at the point of the contrast here, is that, like, there's that these characters, like, someone who's sort of stuck between two worlds and trying to mediate them into a central whole to find their identity. That would be my initial read on this. Oh, hello, Ghost. Another very edgy ass, I am a dark, scariest, like, with a little bit more of a, like, where Shiv is more like, I'm a cold assassin who lurks in the shadows and always gets my kill. This guy feels more passionate, right? Like, this character feels more like they're going out on their emotions, maybe a bit more. Like, they've got a bit more of that, like, anger issue thing going on, especially, like, with the jagged cloak and, like, the torn sleeves. Like, the fucking teeth on their shoes, which, like, there's a fucking detail. There's a more of an element of, like, a Punisher style character here, right? Like someone who's like, I'm here to deal violence and pursue my goals because of something. Like, that's the initial vibe with, like, the sort of wild and sort of discombobulated hair. Well, not that wild, but you can see, like, it's not well combed or well managed. And then, of course, also, like, big fucking giant fuck off assault rifle and, like, this sort of kunai looking ass combat knife thing that they've got going on. Is like, okay, this feels like a anger and passion driven character. Where it gets interesting is where, like, with the sort of cargo pants and, like, muscle Kevlar vest thing that they've got going on is interrupted by these Warcraft, or rather Warhammer ass, like big pauldrons with like the chain across them and like the cloak, the cape that's hanging off of them, which sort of like, that seems more like, well, it's too dark to be like a noble paladin, but it seems more like, oh, this is something that feels like the mark of like a sorcerer or a knight of some kind of chivalric character in some description or other, where the storytelling there for me, I guess, would be that this person was the soldier of some kingdom or regime or a loyal servant of it, was used to wear a big fancy dress uniform with like sigils that affirm their loyalty to the whatever the sigil of that is, whatever that means. But then, you know, something happened, some kind of tragedy, like their kingdom was overtaken, or they were betrayed by their liege, or something, or like some bad something happened that forced them to step into more like civilian clothes and adopt a more violent, angry style. Would be my initial read on this character, is like this is someone who has like a frayed nobility that sort of hangs off their back, that's been replaced by like the brutal efficiency of sort of modern warfare bullshit. That's especially like with the fucking actual, like, it doesn't look like a realistic assault rifle, let's be fucking clear, but it looks like, this looks like a video game assault rifle from a video game, right? Like this looks like something you'd pick up in like a Call of Duty, Future Warfare, whatever kind of video game, chunky, big, brutal piece of like machinery metal. In contrast to like the sort of more finely crafted and gilded and decorated aspect of like these pauldrons and the cloak and like the chain across it and like these prayer tags, whatever they are, which are also wrapped around this character's hands and arms for whatever reason. So there's this mix of the ceremonial and the practical going on here. Which, like, okay, that's a twist that implies some kind of personality, even though, looking at the archetype as it is, I don't know, this character seems like the least interesting one to me. Just because, you know, I've seen 10,000 billion million of dark, angry, edgy man with knife and assault rifle. That's like, boy, hiccups. Always are the worst times. That's an archetype that I'm familiar with and not sort of personally very interested in. I need a drink. Okay. Maybe that fixed it a little bit. Moving on to Kingpin. So, I mean, yeah. It's like if definitely has the body type of the Kingpin from Across the Spider-Verse. That's for damn sure. Built like a brick shit house, he is. Very much. I like the weirdness here. I quite like it. So, the red hood that they literally have over the thing, red hood with like the crossed out, that very much like, it feels like it's specifically that feels very much like it's referencing towards Red Hood. That feels like it's referencing towards Baron Zemo, maybe? Like, Baron Zemo has that kind of thing. Very superhero thing. Like, this feels like a very sort of superhero-ass bit of character design in a way that the rest of the character kind of doesn't so much. So we have this aesthetic split, right? Like, we have on the one hand this, like, big leather overcoat, and, like, on the right, on the left hand over there, like a watch that seems to be made of gold and expensive. I think it's a watch. It looks like it's meant to be a watch. And like the fingerless glove, and then like this sort of big, brutal revolver-looking pistol that sort of feels a little bit old-fashioned in its way, right? And then as we transition over towards the left here, something else tears its way out through that sort of mobster-esque aesthetic, like that modern mobster-esque aesthetic, street thug-esque aesthetic. And then we have this fucking demon arm shit going on, like with an arm that's way too long and like very disproportional to a body that's already weird with its proportions, and which holds like this glowing eye in the palm of its hand, this like fountain of power kind of thing. Where, given that the character's name is Kingpin, you kind of get the vibe of, okay, this was like a mob enforcer or some kind of career criminal who had a freak run-in with, I don't know, vial of radioactive something, got bitten by a hippo, who knows, whatever it is, like some kind of bullshit superhero origin story, right? Where they acquire some kind of strange, overpowering mutant superpower that changes their body and gives them access to all sorts of power that a street thug like them simply shouldn't have, right? And there's like real menace in that tiny little eye slit with the little itty-bitty eye on the bottom of this. Clearly been torn out of the hood very roughly. And, like, we have this thing of, like, the X over the eye indicating, like, a scarring or some kind of battle damage kind of thing. And, like, the fucking literal skull tattoo, whatever this is, on their chest, which is like, oh my god, dude, really? Like, really? Like, you don't think that's a little lame? Don't tell them I said that. But yeah, I like the disproportionality. I like the play with, like, really highly distorted proportions to make this character stand out and be interesting. Like, clearly a tank character from a gameplay perspective, or at least someone who can take a certain amount of damage. But then also with the potential clearly to unleash hell and back on whomsoever that they might choose with all of this mystical, cosmic, glowing purple power energy. And again, the fact that this is purple energy magic stuff, does that connect to Void? Like, are they drawing their power from the same source in some sense? I would be curious to know. It's not clear to me aesthetically, but we do have, like, the eye motif in the center of, like, this glowing eyeball thing that he's holding in his hands, and we do also have the eye on Void's shoulders, so it's, I guess, not aesthetically speaking unthinkable. I don't know that I like the bare chest. I do feel like the sort of mobster with evil superpowers thing might come across a little bit better if the guy was also wearing, like, a proper shirt that had been torn through by the demon arm. Like, that feels a little bit more like this was a character who was put together and maybe had more humanity to them, even if they were kind of a monster. But then this thing sort of literalized their internal monstrosity into, like, an external expression of this power and anger and, like violence. It feels stronger to me if there's more of a facade for this thing to tear through and contrast with. That this character, like, might have been wearing, like, a relief, like, sort of think Black Mask from the DC universe, right? Where Black Mask has the scary Black Mask on his head, but also always wears, like, an immaculate suit, right? To sort of appropriate the aesthetic of power and respectability a little bit, and then ruin it with the fucking Black Mask. This feels a little bit like there was an opportunity to do that here as well, to have the guy wearing, like, the big mobster overcoat, but then also like a nice shirt underneath with, like, maybe a tie or something. Because, like, if you're gonna come over to my mama's house, you gotta fucking dress up properly, right? Like, sorry for the shitty garbage mobster impression, but you know what I mean, right? Like, this is someone who, like, at one point had to go around sort of affecting respectability, but then demon arm, and now we just kind of go monster with it without the pretense to humanity. Like, that would be my read there. Anyway, Zeri is here. Interesting skin. I don't think I've seen that one in League of Legends yet, but Zeri is here. Hasn't brought her gun for some reason. I don't know why. Again, I'm being reductive. I'm kidding around a little bit. This is not just Zeri, although the overlap is, I mean, it's there. It's hard not to see that there's a certain amount of overlap, but where Zeri presents much more of sort of like a plucky teenager vibe, right? Like, this is like a plucky teenager who's defending her community and who's, like, out for fun, and, like, she's a cheerful superhero sort of type character, like friendly neighborhood Zeri, right? Like Spider-Man vibes. This has more villain energy to it, doesn't it? Like, this has a little bit, this is darker, this is a little bit more dangerous. This is definitely edgier and much more sharp in its shape language. Like, Zeri is for the most part not super electricity themed in terms of her shape language, but here it's like not just the lightning bolts on, like, the coat, but also the big spiky sort of fur collar and, like, the fur lining that's hanging out here. Lots of spikes, lots of angular shapes in the character design itself, in the hair, and even down to the shoes, right? Like, which are these big goth platform boots with, like, these spiky belt buckle things across it. This is a character who feels a lot more lethal. This is a character who feels a lot more like someone who might casually be capable of taking a life than Zeri is. And certainly not as cheerful and fun and harmless. We got these Ankh earrings, or maybe they're swords, or maybe they're crosses. Either way, it's the sort of thing that indicates, oh, okay, like, some kind of interest in presenting yourself in a way that aligns with that symbol. Probably a sword or a dagger, right? Like, it's probably about lethality in this case, I would imagine, looking at it. And then the little chewing gum bubble being blown. Like the sort of classic universal signifier of a teenage girl who doesn't give a shit what boomers say, right? Like, or just a kind of sort of youthful disrespect for their surroundings. That's sort of what like chewing gum and blowing bubbles with it. That's the shorthand that is usually intended to stand in for, right? Like someone who's disrespectful, who's not listening, who's only really paying attention to what they themselves are doing, kind of vibe. That's usually how that's deployed. There's a bit of sexualization going on. Like we have the mesh top with like the bra underneath, which again, not very Zeri. Like the exposed midriff. We have like the stockings that are torn, like the bare thighs and like the tiny booty shorts thing. There's a sexualization going on here, but not a sexual availability, right? Like, this is not a character who's, like, posing and going, oh my god, look at my titties, I'm so hot and horny. Like, this is not anime thirst trap kind of character design, right? This is a character where the sexuality is present in the character design, but doesn't seem to be there for the purposes of being gawked at, right? Like, it's not a character that's objectified by their sexualization. It seems like a part of their self-expression. Again, if we take it, like, with the blowing of the bubblegum and the goth aesthetics that are sort of present, or punk aesthetics that are sort of present in the character design, this is something that's confrontational, that's about, like, fuck you, I don't care what you say, I like to dress this way, I'm going to show off my body, and any fucking prude who wants to have something to say about it can go get fucked. Like, that it's maybe a confrontational thing, that it's a thing about, like, breaking boundaries or ignoring social mores. That's certainly one way to view it. And I quite like it. Like, I think, like, this makes the character sexy, but not in a way that feels like it thinks I'm an idiot, right? Like, not in a way that, again, like fucking those semi-pornographic anime games, like what's it called, Nikke, where it's just like every single character has to have their titties out to here, and like really like everything's pushed up to show them off and kind of thing. Where it's like games that sort of treat the audience as though they are drooling idiots that like can't get turned on by anything except the most obvious naked pandering kind of thing. This doesn't feel like that. This feels like the character is sexy, the sexiness is there for you to appreciate, but it's not a defining feature of the character design, which is aided in no small part just by the sheer Super Saiyan fucking lightning show that they're putting on here. Like, there is definitely a big emphasis, especially with the way the collar is, like, rippling and, like, carrying the power upwards. There's a real emphasis on the character's power here, on their lethality, and a sense of passion to them as well. Like, there's the disaffected sort of teenager chewing gum thing, but then you can also see inside their chest, and you can see the glow inside of them. Like, this is power that's inside of them that's, like, threatening to burst out. And that's very much a thing of, like, this character has passion inside of them. Anger, perhaps, wrath issues, or an internal destructive need that they channel outwards in these energy explosions. So, like, this seems like a character that's very much focused on the character's lethality, power, strength, and I quite like that. As to what their story is, hard to say. Like, it feels like it's meant to be the rebellious one. Like, this feels like it's meant to be the sort of raise a middle finger to everyone else and be like, fuck you, you can't tell me what to do, old man, kind of vibe, relative to the other characters that are present so far. And I'd say, like, it's probably a thing of, like, whatever the storm is, whatever, like, the super objective of whatever lore is present, this character is probably, like, my guess would be that this is someone who's like, I'm here for my own reasons, I want it for myself because of, I don't want some shitty person who I hate to have it. Like, it's a spite thing of, like, I'm going for whatever the treasure is because fuck you. Or that it's, I need the money to do a thing that I want to do, and, like, this is, like, the fastest and most efficient way for me to get that using the powers that I have access to kind of vibe. Like, that is not a considered thing. It, like, again, with the lightning especially, I feel like the character would be impulsive. And mercurial, right? Like, that they can go off at a moment's notice is sort of the vibe that I would get. That they're not cool and cold and calculated, but it's like, they're quiet right up until the moment they snap and then everyone dies kind of thing. Then we have Brawl, who's like, oh, Brawl is because he likes to brawl? Is that why he's called Brawl? Is that why he has Aatrox's sword for some reason? And yeah, like, hard to read this character very much, I think. Like, this is a classic thing. We've got the scar across the chest, which indicates, okay, this character gets into violence. Like, scar across the eyebrow, again, same thing. They are naked from the waist up, which is like a classic sort of barbarian, like, fighter thing of like, I'm going into battle and I'm not going to be constrained by something so weak as armor. Only weaklings use armor. I'm using naked body flesh to deflect weapons with my hard abs kind of vibe, right? It's a sort of classic wild man, passionate, angry, sort of a recklessness thing, right? In terms of a warrior character design. And the weapon certainly bears that, like fucking Monster Hunter greatsword ass, giant, chunky weapon the size of the character themselves, which very much indicates this is a character whose like main thing is offense, is swing big thing at thing until thing breaks, and then you win. Kind of strategy and kind of vibe, right? Like, man after my own heart, I will say. You've seen how I play Dark Souls. And then there is this. So this to me looks like a manacle. Right? Like, this to me looks like... Because it seems either that the character has lost their hand, and this is some kind of prosthetic, or that they were in a prison of some kind and broke out, and this manacle is like the one thing they haven't been able to remove from that, because you have this thing that kind of looks like this was tied to the floor at one point and then got torn the fuck out, but it's still, like, holding onto the character's hand. Which, again... classic anime thing, a character who has one hand sealed, it might be a thing of the when he uses his ultimate is like, aha, I'll unleash the 100% of my true power, rah, and do a big swing and then like seal their hand back up once they're done because it's the power is too great, it can't be controlled. Maybe something like that is going on. I'm also curious about this grappling hook ass thing. Like, again, that kind of looks like, was that a chain that was attached to them, or does that have some kind of grappling hook function? Is that a thing they can use, or is that a reminder of their imprisonment? Who knows? There's a little bit of, like, in these overlapping flat patterns down on the pants, I see a little bit of the armored skirt of, like, a samurai. Like, there's a little bit of that shape language in there, which I wonder if that's sort of... Is that meant to be an actual thing that evokes something? That this is a guy who's like a Ronin-type character? Like, I had a samurai's honor once, but now I'm masterless and roaming the lands for my own reasons kind of thing? I'm not sure. That would be my initial read on that shape language, though, as a component of the character's design. We have this shield emblem gem thing, which has like the same red color as the sword, but which also seems to be like... stained with blackness, which again, is that a thing that's supposed to indicate that this character's power is something that's corrosive or dangerous to them? Like every time they use their full power, they accrue more damage to their soul in some way? Is that what we've got going on there? I'm not sure. I do like the very modern-ass sort of tech wear, bright sneaker shoe pants that we've got going on here, because like everything from here up is all fantasy nonsense, right? Like, this is all shit. Like, this could be a League of Legends champion, sure, why not? Absolutely. But then we get down here, it's like, oh, it's Valorant, Overwatch, just from like the knees down is where we get the sort of tracer ass jumpsuit thing. I like the contrast. I like the intrusions of modernity into this thing, which is like clearly much more fantasy inspired. I don't know that it says anything about him. Like, my initial reading of shoes like that and, like, sort of slick leggings like that is, oh, it's agility, right? Like, this character runs fast or jumps high or does some kind of good athletics in some sense. Whether that's the intended reading or not, I'm not 100% sure. I don't really know how to read that as part of the character design, because everything else about him seems to be about, I am brutal and I swing a big sword until things die. Not so much, I run really fast and I hurdle things real good. So I don't know. I don't know about Brawl. Then Shrike. It's the sniper, everyone. It's the sniper who snipes, which is interesting because we already had a character who looked kind of like a sniper who snipes, but that sniper who snipes also had a handgun, which indicates that maybe sniping things with sniper shots is not the only snipe that they do. But this character only has a sniper rifle, which means that that's probably the only thing they do, so they are the long-range character and don't really have that versatility. Would be my read on, like, the weapon configuration here. Also, that's a lot of bullet. That is, those are large rounds. Do they even fit inside that barrel? Those are large rounds, which is like a sort of thing that goes like, okay, this is one shot, one kill kind of sniper, right? This is like, I hit you with a bullet and then you disappear in a fine pink mist kind of sniper. Again, we have some mix and matching of like sort of modern and fantasy aesthetics. We have this glowing orb with these like light trails that look like the tripod that you put a sniper rifle on when you're like scoping while lying prone. We have some sort of fantasy-inspired aesthetics here and there in the shape design of the rifle itself. We have like this long golden double scarf thing that they're wearing, which again, that feels like a very sort of fantasy hero sort of thing. Bird skull on their hip, again, very sort of fantasy thing. But then everything else about the character is distinctly and entirely modern. First of all, that it is a sniper rifle made of metal, right? But then also, we have these belt holsters, which are sort of cowboy-esque, but like, again, very modern, fingerless gloves. You have this muscle tee that the character is wearing, muscle tank. Like the long, done-up anime hair, like the makeup on point. And the jeans, which, interesting. I find this is probably the most boring of the character designs, sort of overall. I feel there's the least going on here that I can sort of seize on as a point of characterization or as a point of storytelling. I don't really know what this character's deal is by the look of her. Like, there's some earth tones going on, for example, in the hair. We have like this like sort of creamy blonde, and then this earthy brown, which sort of continues into the scarf, which has maybe a little bit of a leaf thing going on, and then like that also bird skull and like these sort of big sensible, well, I say sensible, but like aesthetically speaking, designed to evoke the idea of practical hiking boots, and like the pants that are torn. That all sort of says hiker, rock climber, someone who spends a bunch of time in nature and gets all scraped up about it kind of vibe. Muscle tee or muscle tank also kind of supports the idea of like a rock climber, someone who's athletic in nature. How that fits together with the sniper thing, though, I don't really know. Like what this character's story could be is simply not apparent to me at all, just from looking at them. This feels much more like a fairly generic combination of like aesthetically appealing traits, but not really something that, at least to me right now, seems to cohere towards any kind of like central character. They feel, the elements of the character here feel like they're working at cross purposes rather than working together, right? Which, like, and in small doses, again, like on Brawl here, that can be interesting, right? Like that the whole of the character design is so very much like, I am warrior fantasy warrior man. And then we get like this one modern element that sort of throws a wrench in the works of that. Here it feels a little bit like there isn't anything throwing the wrench in the works. It's just all stuff that doesn't really interact with each other in a way that I would find compelling. Which, yeah, I don't really know what this character's deal is, and I don't think I can figure it out just by looking at them. Then we have Ash Senna. My word. It really, like... I think it's especially, like, the black and white top that they wear here. Which, like, very much reminds me of, like, Sentinel fashion in League of Legends. And, like, the hood and the cloak and the bow and, like, the arrows. It's like, those are the elements of Ash's design that matters, plus the white hair, right? So that genuinely kind of throws me for a loop. There's a couple of things interesting here. They're wearing what seems like a compass, right? Which is like, okay, navigation, tracking, or maybe having a lodestar, a north star, a central guiding point that they navigate by, something central that pulls at them, that they're maybe trying to move towards. Also, the fucking this right here, that is just the Sentinels of Light symbol. Which is not, like, it's a very generic thing. It's not like that's a hyper unique kind of thing, but come on. Like, the compass is interesting because that can mean a bunch of different things in that sense, right? Like, it can mean having a place that you're traveling towards, that you're trying to get, being a navigator, being someone who always knows the direction to go kind of vibe, or someone who's always searching for a place to go, for a way to go with themselves. All of those things, like, there's some character implied by the presence of that compass on the character. As for the rest of it, I don't really know. Like, we have this duality split thing where you have, like, this one arm that is black with these, like, runes on it that's holding the bow. Then you have the other arm, which has, like, this bright glow. You have the duality split between, like, the black and white of the top itself, the shadows of the hood, like the bright glowing hair. So there's some kind of duality thing going on. They have ghost feet. It kind of looks like their shoes are made of ghost, which again makes me think of Senna. there's definitely something ghost-like and ethereal about them, like in a sense of them, like maybe they're a wraith, maybe they have one foot in the grave, maybe again, stuff that makes me think of Senna. Certainly there's something wispy about them, right? Like something not quite real, not quite stable. The glowing eyes with like the white pupils, again, is the sort of thing like this character sees into the afterworld or the beyond, or has like a sight or a vision beyond what mortal people, normal people can comprehend. And then like the bow, it's a classically sort of like elven archer, character who thinks, like character who's careful, character who is accurate, character who is like a version of a sniper, but with a different vibe, right? More traditionalist, sort of more in tune with the fantasy vibes and the fantasy aesthetics of the world. Which sort of, again, if this is a character who always knows what way to go, this is a character who has like a central lodestar or a guiding principle that they're always orienting themselves towards, then like, okay, like the fact that they have a bow and like this is a very precise and like careful weapon that requires like physical manipulation. It's not just, you can't just pull a trigger and then something happens. It's like, this is a physical craft. And I appreciate, by the way, the muscularity of the arms here. That looks like the arms of someone who uses a bow for a living. Unlike Ash, again, who's spindly as a fucking twig. Good God. Senna too, by the way. Which bothers me. But yeah, definitely looks like a ghost archer who's like split between two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead, and who's a navigator, maybe someone who helps the dead navigate, a psychopomp, right? Someone who helps the dead navigate between these two realms, between these two worlds, or who habitually travels between the two in search of something, maybe in search of a lost lover or a dead companion or a child, like could be anything. That would be my sort of speculative read on what this character design is saying. Then we have Bishop here, where again I'm sort of a little bit like with Shrike. I'm not 100% sure where and how to read what's going on here. I would say that we're dealing with a Torval, right? A little bit. Like, we have these, like, these literally look like volcanoes on their back, right? So that's very much like a thing of like building up pressure, building up power until some kind of an eruption, right? And that matches pretty well with like sort of the drill thing on the gauntlets. And like this looks like a character who like charges up power and then releases it in a big punch, fire, electricity explosion kind of vibe. There's an interesting asymmetry here where like the gauntlet is this arm that's like huge, absolutely enormous, whereas the spike thing here with a little bomb on it is much more of a naked sort of bare arm thing. I like that asymmetry. Very Tracer kind of chrono vest thing going on here on the chest, which I don't really know. I would say that thing theoretically should be an indication of like, this is a power gauge, right? Like this is a thing that glows more and more powerfully as the character builds up power and gets ready to unleash their strength. I don't know that I'd put it on the chest like that, although the chest definitely needs to be broken up by something. There's a little bit of DreamWorks face going on here, like the smirk and like the one eyebrow down and the other one a little bit raised. So that indicates a sort of quirky, sardonic, confident, maybe a little bit like sarcastic, ironic personality who's not like, I'm not impressed by all the nonsense that's going on here, I'm gonna make fun of it. We have the anchor tattoo, air quotes, on the leg, which again is the sort of thing that's like, along with a little bomb decal, along with like the scratches and the tattoo on the character themselves, suggests a little bit of a rough personality, right? Like a character who gets into scrapes, a character who like has a past, who is interested in decorating their armor with fun stuff and not just like shit that may be practical, right? Reminders of places they've been, adventures they've gone on. Which sort of like the stuff that indicates the character has a past, right? Has a personality, has places they've been, that they're experienced. Maybe a little bit jaded, even, by everything that they've seen. They've got the hair up in the ponytail, but it's not like tightly tied or wound, so you don't get that sense of uptightness or constraint. This is more like a wild hairstyle where I need this hair out of my head for a second, so like tie up a ponytail behind my head, get rid of it, I don't want to think about it. But not a hairstyle that feels like managed and poised and posed in the same way that Celeste's hairstyle does, for example. I don't know exactly what to, because like, it seems like mining gear, right? Like, especially with the screw motif here, or like the screw drill thing going on. This seems like mining gear, right? Like, this seems like gear that's made to do some kind of manual labor that has then been repurposed towards some kind of like violent purpose or adventuring purpose, whatever the case may be. So like, this might be a character who once upon a time worked in industry, and then something, they wanted a change of pace, or adventure came calling, or something bad happened, and now they're seeking revenge, kind of thing. Like, they took the technology that they were using for their job and repurposed it into adventuring gear, and then went on a bunch of adventures. Now they've customized it all to hell, and like, it's a very personal thing to them. Maybe something along those lines. Outside of that, though, I don't know that I can get that much more out of reading the character design as such. So that's I guess that's the end of the video, really. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about these characters because I found them interesting, and I thought it was fun to try and analyze them from a complete blind spot. Bye.